Welcome to The Essential Element, the Elements of Education podcast. My name is Christian Page, and I'm your host. I'm grateful that you're choosing to spend your time with us. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're choosing to be here with us. We are still continuing our work on having conversations with our teachers and talking about changing the face of public education. In today's episode, Zach and I recap some of our favorite moments from this year. We talk about a new format that's going to be coming up in the fall. Talk a little bit about rest and the break that we're getting ready to have, and hopefully find ourselves talking more about the how of mentorship, learning the strategies to think about what is the practical application of the things that are happening at the element schools. So thank you for joining us, and without further ado, here's our conversation with just the regulars, Christian and Zach.
Our school, we really believe in relationships, and that is emphasized through mentor group. And so I wholeheartedly believe in that.
What do they need? I have to be able to answer that question. And that takes a little bit of time. The biggest teacher, I think, is failure. The brain works in failure. And those failures are actually synapses rewiring themselves in your brain.
And think about where you want to be. Because when you find your place, you find your people. And our purpose is attached to people.
You know, when there's a phenomenal teacher, when there's a phenomenal educator, when there's a phenomenal mentor, one of the mistakes that we make is we make it look too easy. Like, everyone sees the shining moment on stage. No one sees, right, like the hard time spent.
All right. Welcome to the Essential Element, Elements of Education podcast. Today you have a special treat. There are no guests, just regulars, just family. But it's myself and Zach. And our goal for today really is for us to recap some of the bright moments that we've had over this season of the podcast, talk about some of our favorite moments, give a little bit of expectation for what's going to happen as we return in the fall. We'll take a little bit of a break. Everybody needs vacation and rest, even though rest is hard to come by sometimes. But just an opportunity to reflect how things have gone, talk about what's going to be coming in the future, and for folks to just see how we get to hang out, because I enjoy hanging out with you, Zach.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Our hope is the goal of this podcast from the beginning was trying to give an opportunity for our teachers to talk to each other. We have, 3 schools, 3 campuses, and we're dispersed across the whole city. So it's hard to find specific logistically opportunities for teachers just to get to share with each other what they do and how they do it. So that was the hope. And in doing so, we introduced, a number of teachers across our 3 schools. It was really great to hear some of their stories and experiences and what some of their expertise are. As we kind of explored this idea of mentorship in the classroom and how mentorship can really transform the way that you think about teaching when it's really centered around relationship and focused on 4 goals of growth for students, so that mentorship is more than just relationships with kids. I love hanging out with kids, but it's really about how do you connect what kids are doing every day to where they want to be and help them get there, and mentoring them in that process. So I'm excited to kind of think about this past season as we've, now had like 15 or 16 different episodes introducing some of these teachers and some of our mentors at the 3 schools, and then think about what we're going to do next year. And as we continue this podcast into kind of season 2 in the fall.
So opening it up, what was one of your favorite moments?
One of my favorite moments. Well, it was cool to hear from so many of our teachers about their own personal experiences. When you're teaching and you're a mentor, you bring in a lot of the ways that people taught you. I remember Jessie talking about her story when she was a student, and that's really relevant because she not only is a mentor now and a teacher, but a student, or was a student at SOTA, and just the impact that Robin, her mentor, had on her life and how it helped her get through a really difficult time and also held her accountable through that process. One thing she told me later that she didn't mention, I think Robin actually told me this. Jessie had told the story about how her mom, her father passed away in high school, and she would been going through that and kind of cutting class. And, she'd say she was going to the hospital, but she really wasn't. She was just kind of disconnecting from community, which is a normal response when you're dealing with grief and in trauma like that as a young person, to just kind of disengage. It becomes difficult to go through those everyday motions. And when she went through that experience, she talked about how Robin sat her down and explained what was happening to her and asked her through, how are you going to deal with this and how are you personally going to respond? One thing that she didn't share that I thought was so amazing, can't believe she didn't share this. Robin told me, I asked Robin about it. Like, do you remember having that conversation with Jesse? And Robin said, yeah, there was actually one mentor group where she didn't show up to the dance performance and she was a dancer. And so we got the whole mentor group that was in the dance company with her. And we just showed up at her dad's hospital with her and sat there with her. And she was shocked that we actually showed up. First of all, because it meant that she was actually going to be there. So we told her we were coming, but to have all of her classmates actually like coordinate and be in her life in that way and be present was pretty amazing.
And the whole mentor group showing up.
That's what she said. That's what Robin said. Yeah. I don't know why Jesse maybe didn't remember that, but Robin very distinctly remembered that when Jesse was a student.
And
it was cool.
No, that's special. That's like, it's a different level of empathy.
Yeah.
Like I've heard the stories of, like a teacher showing up on behalf or somebody having a relationship, but that speaks to like the cohesion of building a unit, right? That like, no, we felt strongly enough that we all went.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, that's special.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was another, I loved the episode when we talked with Jen Floniker at IDEA about her experience as a young person going from high school and college into the military, and flying C-17s, I think is what she said. She flew for the Air Force. And just how jarring of an experience it was. And it can't be understated how someone like her who's very, as an individual, high performing, academically successful, driven, going into an environment where there's not a lot of representation for a woman in the military. There's not a lot of engagement or feeling like you belong, and how that made it so difficult for someone who was already very high performing. And it just disrupts the whole idea of what we talk about. She talked about the word grit. Yeah. Like, what does it mean to have grit and determination? Oh, we just need students to have more grit. And even someone that was as high performing as she was to achieve the things she had done as a young person, as soon as she was in a community where she didn't feel like she connected and belonged and didn't feel welcomed, the grit factor was almost not an issue. It didn't even get to that point.
I appreciated her reframing, and I might butcher it. But she was saying like, when all you know is grit and there's nothing else left, right? Like, I think that's been, I think haunting is a good word, right? Like something that I have not forgotten, and it's kind of just been, it's been hanging out in my backpack. You know what I mean? Because I think about that. I think about what that means for me personally. I think about for so many of us, right? That like, we think so much about being resilient and fighting through and pulling through, and like what's left of you after is not the same human that started the conversation. If that's all that you know, I think you can lose so much beauty and value focusing on those things instead of. It's important to be a well-rounded human, I think, is the statement that I took away from it. As opposed to, right, I'm really dangerous at this one particular thing and nobody in the world can stop me at it. And right, like picking up the rest, I think, is important. So it's been a moment that I've kind of sat with too.
It is, yeah. And as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking about how we think about kids' development and just human beings in general. When you grow and you change, you become a very different person. What is it that makes you you as you go through that process? Like, I always think about, have you heard of the ship of Theseus example?
No.
Oh, there's this like logical problem called the ship of Theseus, and it's the ship that sails from Europe over to the New World or wherever. I don't know if it was the New World, but on its way, pieces of the ship start falling off, and so they have more wood on board, and they start replacing pieces of the ship as it's sailing. And by the time it arrives at its destination, every single piece of the ship has been replaced with a new board. And so then the question is it still the ship of Theseus? Is it now a new ship? If its entire physical existence has been replaced, but the ship itself sailed and just replaced one piece at a time, is it still the same ship or is it a new ship?
Yeah. Ooh, do you want to open the argument?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, in the context of like, as people grow, you shed, like when I was in high school, I was the drama kid and I was in every play. And then as you grow older, that piece kind of peels off and you start to become a new person and take on new interests. And maybe over the course of 15 years, you look different, you have different beliefs and attitudes, you have different talents. Are you still the same person or have you transformed into something new?
I think there's some of that that's beautiful, right? Because like then your past doesn't determine where it is that you're headed. But some of that feels so sad to me as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I've been in places. I used to lead 2-day 16-hour trainings in a particular school district.
Wow.
And we would get to one portion of training, and without fail, it was like a really vulnerable latter part of the first day, and then an opening of the second day. And we would walk this circle and essentially talk about like what we had to give up, sometimes culturally, sometimes, you know, just as a person along the way. And I would demonstrate it with my body, right? Like I would drop my jacket, or I would drop a shoe, or I would drop a, and like sometimes, you know, we navigate spaces, and out of necessity, we give up parts of ourselves, Theseus, right? To get to the destination. And I think the saddest part about it is sometimes we forget about those things. And once we remember, it's too late to go and reclaim them.
Yeah. I guess the way I think about it is, well, what is identity then? Like if you're defining yourself by these boards, the pieces that you, the things that you do, the things that you like, is that who you are? And I think there's a power in reminding kids that no matter what you do, who you are doesn't really change. And that's, to me, the greater logical thing of the ship of Theseus problem is like the idea of the ship of Theseus. It's the ship that's sailing from point A to point B. No matter what it's made up of, or what it looks like, or what its boards are, it's still, the identity is deeper than that. So when you tell kids, like, you might go through a lot of phases in life of changing the things you're interested in, looking at a certain way, like wearing a certain type of clothes or trying on different identities, that doesn't change at the core who you are. You're still you through all that process. And getting to know who you are beneath all those boards is the job of a mentor. Like I see beyond the surface of what you put out, right? Especially in high school. Like it's really easy to identify yourself. Well, not even just high school, I think in general, by the things you put out. You know, my biggest frustration whenever you show up to a party or like a social event and you meet someone new, they're like, what's the first question they always ask?
What do you do?
What do you do for a living? It's like, oh, so I can immediately just fill my brain with all the assumptions I have with that. So if you go, I'm an engineer. Oh, it's like, all of a sudden you start filtering in all these things now, the assumptions about you're making about the person. And we do it subconsciously, right? And it works at our schools too. Like, what's your major? Oh, I'm into photography. Oh, you're a photographer. I see what you are.
Yeah.
So what does it mean? And that's why I think the powerful thing of mentor group is like getting to know kids beyond that layer of like outside of all those other things. Who are you as a person? That's why we don't group kids by layer like discipline. You're not in a mentor group with all the other photography kids. You're in a mentor group with kids from all over the school doing a variety of things, because really it's about getting to know who you are beneath those things, not just the outside layer of the things that you happen to do and be good at.
And I think that's like, that's evident in process too, right? Like that's something that is cared about here. I think one of my other favorite episodes was just getting to hang out with all the Next Move students.
Oh yeah.
Right?
That was great.
And I think that was evident. You know what I mean? There were students who majored in this, but took an internship in that.
Right.
Right. Those two things were very off, very different, not even closely related.
Yeah.
And they had awesome experiences.
Yep.
Or some of them found out that this is actually not what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Right, exactly.
Or, you know, I thought one of the things that was really interesting is like, I don't really have a ton of interest in this, but I found out I was extremely good at it. Mm-hmm. And the people around me realized that I was good at it.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm taking away from this is confidence more than I am the trait or the experience of what I did with my hands.
Sure.
And so to your point, right? Like, yeah, I love the idea of like, what's the spirit behind, what sits in the middle of, not just the parts, but I thought that was one of my favorite episodes as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much that goes into teaching on a weekly basis. When you think about how much work you have to do as a teacher to prepare for, you've got, 6 classes you're teaching at our schools, maybe, 3 preps, hopefully not more than 3, however many you have. You have to prep for and make sure the content is ready. And then across those classes, you have 140, 150 kids on your caseload that you want to get to know in the content areas. But then also on top of that, getting to know each one of those mentors. I appreciated Jesse asking the question of like, how do we rethink how sustainable that is and what the burden is on teachers. And how do we create a school system and give teachers space to talk through why that's so important? Because we know we hold as our values, this is really important. It is transformational. And if you ask, I would argue, ask any of the teachers at our schools that have been here for a period of time, and they would say, yeah, the mentor group is part of the secret sauce, right? It's what makes it successful. It's how we know that every kid is going to graduate, and every kid has an adult in the building that knows them deeply and knows them and their story well, whether it's their mentor or not. So that's essential. So then how do we protect that and make sure that it's sustainable? Because it has to sustain into the future. Yeah. So I appreciated that conversation too, of also giving teachers the ability to think about the system and how we take ownership for it and protect it.
And I think she had such a great point. And I remember this darkly too, right? Like, what do you think we should do about, and asking like big ethereal questions like, well, maybe someone should ask teachers.
Yeah, totally.
Because oftentimes they don't, right? Like, get regarded as expert in their own conversation. Yeah. Right? Talking about their day to day. And so I thought that was a really fun point as well. I remember that as like, it really stuck out to me. Like, oh yeah. Right? Like we have that conversation all the time.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Well, what are students like? How do we keep students engaged? And like nobody asking students. Mm-hmm. And like in the conversation of sustainability, I really appreciate her point of like, come
I'm
ask
right here.
us.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and the story of all three of our schools and how they were developed, I've been looking into this recently for some doctoral work, and every single one of the schools was a core group of teachers that got together to look at the way of doing something, talk about it, work through the issues, and they were the ones that designed it. It was that core group. Yeah. And John was saying, like the early days of SOTA, they would work like insane amount of days. They didn't have a waivers. They were teaching 180 days. They went to 5 o'clock every day, and then they would stay after to plan together. And they recognized this is totally not sustainable. We have to do something different and apply for a waiver to cut back some of our days because we're working way longer than most schools. And we're all going to burn out, and it's not going to work if we keep doing this. But it was the core group of teachers making that decision together. And every one of them were looking across the table and saying, we're doing this together because we work here for each other. And the same thing was true for Sammy. Kristen, when she started Sammy, was saying that the beginning of Sammy was this, she called it like, it starts around the kitchen table. And it literally was like next door. When Sammy started, a group of SOTA teachers that said, how are we going to start Sammy? What should it look like? And they'd get together early on Friday mornings and just start planning out what are the things. It wasn't paid work. It was just, they wanted to build it and create it together. And so they showed up to help brainstorm it. And then when I was starting Idea, it was the same thing. We had this group of, original teachers of Melissa and Jaleesa. And then we brought on an additional group and brought them in over the summer and started creating this idea together. And it was really about that core group. And if you're building something as a team of teachers and you're together, it's like, what is the identity of the school that you're creating? It's defined by the people that are sitting around that table and building it with you. Yeah. That's something powerful. And when you talk about asking teachers, like, they should be part of the central process of creating it. They're closest to the action.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just the full circle. Like that's the spirit of the ship of Theseus that you're talking about.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we talking about for next year? We're going to take a little break. We've had this great format this year. We're going to relive some of the best episodes over the summer on the podcast and put some of those together. And then we're going to kind of relaunch in the fall. And I think the hope is we want to have kind of a regular panel of teachers across our 3 schools to talk about these 4 growth goals of discovering yourself and developing your strengths and engaging your community and navigating your future. And around those 4 goals, who are the people that are best to bring in to talk about specific issues? Because one of the things that I think kept coming up, I don't know if you noticed this, is teachers asking, okay, this is great in theory. What does it look like? Like, yeah. It's Wednesday morning at 10:47 a.m. You're 17 minutes into your first mentor group. What are you doing? Like physically, what are you actually doing? Is there a roadmap for that? How do you wrap those 4 goals into a plan? And so we could really dive into some of those specifics and bring some mentors on that have been doing this for a while to talk about how that actually plays out.
And I think I'm excited for that conversation. I think the thing that I like the least is when you tell somebody all the big things that they should be doing and not teach them
right.
essentially how to do it. And I think the thing that would be revealed, this is my hypothesis, right? And we can like put a bet somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think what will happen is that everyone will do this in a vastly different manner.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that's
true. They will
true.
have things that work for them. And And I don't necessarily know that there's going to show up there. I think some things will be loosely tied together, but I don't think that there's a best practice across the board, right? Like that at minute 17, you have to wave your right hand and wiggle your left finger.
Right.
And I know I'm being exaggeratory or being silly in this space, but I think sometimes we get caught up in that idea.
Yeah.
Right. Of like, there absolutely has to be one way for us to do this. And I think that there are multiple ways that essentially get you to the same destination. And so I'm excited to hear about the different strategies that people use.
Absolutely. And again, the personality and individual strengths of a teacher come into play. Like not every teacher is perfect at everything. There are some that really excel at certain things and struggle at others, and it all rounds out. So the teacher that identifies and knows their own strengths and then plays to those strengths so that they can engage kids in the best way possible is always interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in the fall, late August. We're going to take, like 4 or 5 weeks off here, but we'll be continuing to put up clips and kind of rehashes of some of the best moments from season 1. And then we'll be back in the fall with some new staff members to talk about mentorship and how we can continue to grow this vision of changing public education for meeting the diverse needs of all of the students in our city. Elements of Education is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Tacoma, Washington, dedicated to changing public education to better serve the specific and diverse needs of students in our public schools. For more information about how you can support the work that we do, please visit elementsofed.org, or you can find us on Instagram at Elements of Education or on our website.